The Army yesterday talked about the need for right to repair and to be able to do this forward. Colonel Kelly, I'd like to bring you into the conversation talking about the defense industrial base, our big primes, is industry. Do you agree with General Thurgood's assessment on Moore's Law for the CUS domain, and how do you see the defense industrial base adjusting with us?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I do agree with General Thurgood's comment there. I also agree with General Ross, sir. There is no silver bullet for this particular threat. The threat is incredibly versatile. It is very low cost, highly producible, which means our potential enemies can have thousands of them and they can replace them very rapidly on the battlefield. And so, and if you look at the tactics, techniques, and procedures that are being employed today, in many cases, you know, it's not one or two UASs that are coming at you. I mean, just in Europe, 27, 28 September, there was a raid in 6 hours of over 400 UASs at a defended asset there. And so I think you do need multiple different systems, but to the point earlier, they can't take 6 months to train someone on to be able to use, because the technology is going to roll over very, very quickly. I think there's a sensing challenge, particularly when you're talking about the very small ones, small counter-UAS. There's an effector challenge, whether that's kinetic, non-kinetic, and then of course there's a command and control challenge. And so bringing all that together and bringing it together in a way that is rapidly upgradable is a challenge we're going to have going forward. Industry is paying attention, but to your point, sir, when you've got 1,000 different unique requirements that are out there, we could use a little bit more clarity in you know, where do you want us to focus, so that we're not going after 5 or 6 different types of things at one time, that we're developing what you need to accomplish your mission.
And can I pull the thread on that a little bit, sir? General Ross, to you, we heard what Mr. Kelly just said, and I want to go back to something General Thurgood said. He said, it's not just about hardware being the decisive point anymore. We need to think about this as weapon systems, that there needs to be a government methodology, whether it's the data standards. How do we take components from such a large, diverse industrial base and make them into a weapon system that's effective? How is JITF401 going to develop that government methodology, not only across the Department of War, but through the Air Force?
So we've talked about this a few times, and again, if this was an easy problem to solve, it would already be solved. It's standardizing how we send and receive information between sensors, effectors, other tools that would allow us to track over time. Just clarifying how information will be sent and received with baseline standards is really important to make sure that we can have that suite of capabilities and truly plug and play. And so we've spent some time thinking about it. Right now, what we end up doing in the department is we pay a lot of money for integration. In fact, we have multiple integration partners to make sure that our systems work together. That may work now, but that should not be the model that we move towards in the future. And so one of the efforts that we're going to take on internal to the JITF is try to provide baseline standards there for what we think, how we get that data layer right to ensure that we can share. And if we get it, if we get that right, it's going to make it a lot easier in areas where we have direct connections between 130I covered facilities and 124N covered locations. If you think about the National Capital Region, just think about the area where we're in today. You've got military installations scattered about throughout the entire National Capital Region. You've got local law enforcement, you've got federal law enforcement. Everybody has similar concerns, and so we should be able to provide a common intelligence picture of that threat environment and ensure that we are integrated in a way that if the Department of War identifies something as a threat and it's moving out of our covered facility into somebody else's area, they know that it's a threat and they have the ability to use their effectors against it to mitigate that threat.
if I may, that'll get even more important. Right now, we're just dealing with DOD, DHS, DOJ. And in our own stovepipes, we have our problems to solve, but this is about to get much bigger as we roll in the SLTTs, with congressional approval and expansion of the authority set. So interoperability is going to become massively more important. I would argue that a lot of the standards are already out there. Cursor on target for an exchange mechanism has been around for over 20 years. We use it in the FBI every day. We use the Team Awareness Kit for that tactical engagement, that common operating picture for the actual SWAT operator or surveillance operator. And I know your folks do as well. And that's one of the things we're going to be training our folks, the state and local officers down in Huntsville on how to use ATAC. So if and when the authorities are expanded and we have, say, the New Jersey State Police with the authority to fully detect and technically mitigate potential threat UAS, next time there's potential drone sightings at Pickering Arsenal, right? Think of New Jersey Drumegate last year, that they'll be in a position to do something about it. The FBI is not a rapid response force for counter-UAS. I don't think we'll ever really be that. We do our best work through intelligence and investigations and being ahead of the threat. If every day we get calls from critical infrastructure operators and military installations about potential drone incursions over those facilities. And unfortunately, by the time we get that call, it's too late. And the ISR is done, and we're potentially not going to get any attribution on that. So I really do believe that empowering our state and local law enforcement is important, but just as critical is how do they work with the installation commanders and back with us in the federal agencies through interoperability.
Yeah, thank you. This is excellent as we've sort of described the threat. We've talked about some of the technical aspects of what we need to do. I think we're getting into this conversation about the legal legislation, the policies and regulations, and how that impacts what actually our industry can build. And General Ross, to you, as you talked about the counter-UAS mission not beginning and ending at the fence line, what type of authorities or policies are you looking for installation commanders to do which would allow industry to develop the types of sensors and effectors that go beyond the fence line but work in a way that is interoperable with local law enforcement, the way that Mr. Corfey just described?
Yeah, so Adam, I think it's a two-part question. So first is the authorities. So one thing that I think, just based off my experience in the field, is we've got to make sure that the authorities that we do have internal to the Department of War are clear to installation commanders. And I would argue if you asked 10 installation commanders today what their authorities are for counter-small UAS, you'd probably get 10 different answers. At a minimum, for certain, I know you wouldn't get just one. But that should be really clear, so we're pursuing that right now. We're working with OSW policy and the Office of General Counsel to make sure that we use the full extent of the authorities that were intended in the existing National Defense Authorization Act. In parallel, we do have a legislative proposal forward, working with the interagency for the expansion of counter-UAS authorities. For us inside of the Department of War, we focus on the 130I covered facilities with a couple different for a couple different reasons. Making sure that their authorities are clearly understood by installation commanders, we can do that today. That doesn't require a legislative proposal. Making sure that we understand what information we can share between the installation commander and the local authorities, that requires some clarification. So if somebody identifies, we have the ability to sense at range, and we identify something that is appears to be nefarious, it's an unknown UAS and it's moving towards the fence line, we should be able to pass that information. If we have the same, a suspicious unmanned system that is consistently or on a recurring basis incurring over federally protected airspace, that's a problem, and we should be able to not only identify it, but store that information and track it over time so we can identify those areas where there's a pattern. If that happens at Fort Drum and in Fort Bliss and in Fort Sill, well, that's also interesting, and it's something we would want to know if we were going to pursue some type of legal outcome there. I also think that it's important from a 130I perspective, that we understand the existing criteria, and I won't go into all the criteria that are required for a covered facility today. But what I would say to installation commanders is that if you're having trouble getting a 130I packet approved, let me know, and we'll do everything that we can to help.
Can I add to that? Is there anybody in here from the FAA? Okay, maybe this, you should challenge this then. One of the things that when I was at the War College, I wrote a paper. I wrote a thesis on how you, in those days, how to integrate UAS into the national airspace system, and what are the pitfalls and pros and cons of operating UAS in the national airspace system. I didn't realize, 20 years later I'd be in that kind of business, but one of the biggest concerns for the FAA is really two things. One is, how do I determine the intent of an unmanned system? And Matt just talked about that. How far out can I determine the intent of that system to do something nefarious or not nefarious? And then how do you do that with an unmanned system? It's a little easier with a manned platform, right? It's a little easier when you're in a combat environment. But here in the national airspace, it's pretty hard. If you look at the international airport at Singapore, is a really good example of the integration of military assets with civilian assets on an airfield that has international outcomes. And so this policy piece that Matt's talking about there are some really good examples of how we've solved that problem set. Not that it's the example, but it's an example of that outcome. The second piece of that is if we do determine the intent, we can determine the intent of an unmanned aircraft. At what point, beyond the fence line or in the fence line, number one, can I take action? And number two, what level of authority gets to make the decision to take the action? And those are really hard outcomes, right? What level of authority do you want? Do you want Private Thurgood to make that decision? Or do you want General Ross to make that decision? So it's not only determining the intent, but it's the authority at which level you can engage, especially here in the national airspace, and at what distance you can make that engagement. And so I think as we think through the policy pieces of that, and how we think about the national airspace, right? Because if you're the FAA, you want the most, I don't mean to sound harsh, but you want a very conservative approach because you want the highest safety margins you can possibly have in the national airspace. And so that approach has to account for an operational outcome that General Ross is talking about.